So I was asked to lead our conversation on the topic of transition. The relevant documents in the GPH-MILF peace process on transition are two documents. First is the annex on transitional arrangements, and the second one is the annex on normalization. Transition basically means that you are at point A and you want to reach point B. And the road from point A to point B, what process, what steps should you take so that you will reach point B from point A? That is what transition is about. For the MILF government peace process, the point B, or the end of the transition, is the entrenchment of the Bangsamoro government. The thinking, of course, is that the entrenchment of the Bangsamoro government will bring peace in southern Philippines. Okay, so point B, the end goal, is the entrenchment of the Bangsamoro government. Point A is the signing of the comprehensive agreement on the Bangsamoro. So how do we get from the signing of the CAB to the entrenchment of the Bangsamoro government? Now, most of us, if you ask the ordinary Filipino what is transition, they would talk about the drafting of the Bangsamoro Basic Law. But the drafting of the Bangsamoro Basic Law is not the only part of transition. In fact, I was counting, there are at least 12 other major processes, major activities that must happen in the transition other than the Bangsamoro Basic Law. Let me enumerate some of them. First, constitutional amendments. If there are aspects of the comprehensive agreement of the Bangsamoro which cannot fit into the present constitutional framework, the Bangsamoro Transition Commission has been given the authority to submit proposals for constitutional amendment. Second, the establishment of a Bangsamoro Transitional Authority so that it can prepare the government for the entrenchment of the Bangsamoro government in 2016. Third, the establishment of joint management and deployment of existing police force in the ARMM. Fifth, joint peace and security committees and teams. Under the agreements, the parties, both government and MILF, are supposed to create joint peace and security committees, which will bring the commands, bring coordination and facilitation among AFP, PNP, and BF. Sixth, the deployment of AFP and PNP personnel in the Bangsamoro. These things should be happening today as we begin, as the parties begin preparing for the Bangsamoro government. Seventh, disposal of landmines and unexploded ordnance. Number 8, dismantling of identification and dismantling of private armed groups or PAGs. Number 9, socio-economic programs for combatants so that they will be reintegrated back into mainstream society or back to their communities. Number 10, the decommissioning of the BIA forces, including putting the guns out of use. Number 11, transitional justice and reconciliation activities and programs. Number 12, confidence-building measures like rehabilitation of identified camps of the MILF and the preparation for amnesty, pardon, and similar processes for BIA forces for crimes or actions committed during the whole of this unpeace in southern Philippines. And then the 13th is a signed exit document, which basically is a document that says all the agreements have been fulfilled. There seems to be a thinking that the other transitional activities have to wait for the BBL or for the Bangsamoro Basic Law. And I think, wittingly or unwittingly, these activities on the other transitional activities have become or part of leverage of the parties in negotiating for the BBL. So right now, the other major transitional activities are at a standstill or have not really moved significantly. But we know that a lot of the work on the ground, which would involve a lot of our groups, a lot of civil society, a lot of people's organizations, have something to do with this one. Private armed groups, dismantling of private armed groups, socio-economic reforms, decommissioning of BIA forces, deployment, disposal of landmines, confidence building measures, so on and so forth. These are the hard stuff of transition. Now, but because of the complications in the political front, in the discussion between the government and the MILF, the focus has totally been on the drafting of the BBL. So what I'm saying is that there is a need for us as we wait, and because we know that the BBL is now is moving, that we need to really focus our attention on these other aspects of transition. Because the success of these other activities of transition will affect the whole peace process. Well, another observation is that the actors, as you know, in the transition process are actually few. And it's a given, so that those people who are involved in negotiations are also involved in the drafting of the law, and most probably involved also in making the transition. So because of overwork and overexpanded work on their part, there has not been much movement in these other areas. I would say that now we are looking at the end of almost 2 years of President Aquino's government. There is really a need to now engage the people who might be in the next administration, who are the leading presidential candidates, for example. There is really a need to engage them, because they will be the ones who will be handling the implementation of the transitional arrangements in the future. I would say that as an observer of this process, the parties really need to divorce the negotiation guys from the implementation guys. Right now, those who are in the negotiations are also handling the implementation of the peace agreement. This is required, I think, because implementation requires a different set of skills, a different set of temperament, and different ways or modes of operating. Lastly, I think that right now, what we have seen that, government really needs to step up to bring the whole of government in the implementation process. The implementation has been focused, let's say, on OPAP and on a few people in the Office of the President. They really need to bring everyone together, AFP, PNP, the ALG, in a real sense, because implementation requires the whole of government to be involved, because this is such a big, complex project that it requires everyone to come in together and be clear about one's goals and try to work with each other, because this really requires the whole of government. My last point, I think, is that the peace process generally has been really a conversation of the political elites. And now that it's going to Congress, it's going to be now a conversation of the politicians. From the negotiators, it's now going to be a conversation among politicians. So the question that we have to ask is, how can we make an impact into this process so that more and more people, especially the stakeholders, are brought into this process, rather than it being only contained in the discussion or dialogue of a few. I think I'd like to end with that as a basic a set of starting points. My view has always been that I'm also like a explorer like yourself. I don't have the answers as well. But I'm really, really interested in seeing how, what your points of view are with respect to how we can move this process and make sure that the transition works. Because a signed agreement will not bring peace. And a signed agreement will not mean that implementation will be automatic. We really need to work hard on this one. But we need to amplify or widen our vision from law and conversations among congressmen and senators to the real on-the-ground issues of transition.